I love visiting my grandma. She always makes the food that I like, and in large quantities, and spoils me. With the hustle and bustle of college life, it's nice to go back to my childhood and allow myself to be spoiled for a few hours every few weeks. Even though she has 6 grandchildren, she made it clear that I'm her absolute favorite. She'd often have the whole family around for dinner, and after they left, she'd bring out the good stuff she made just for me. We usually have a big Christmas dinner together with the whole family. However, as the years go by and the younger ones start growing up, fewer and fewer people show up. Last year, everyone already made plans, forgetting about poor grandma. I don't blame them, but they often forget how these visits mean a lot to her, especially ever since grandpa died. That's why when I talked on the phone with her and she asked me if I had any plans, I lied to her and told her I didn't. She immediately jumped at the opportunity to politely invite me, going so far as to offer me to sleep over at her place. She said there's one room which hasn't been used in years and I could stay in there. I immediately said yes and agreed to stay over, realizing how happy that would make her. I canceled the plans I made with my friends, telling them something else came up. Although they were bummed about it a little, their drinking party wouldn't stop because of me. That was the last Christmas that I would ever spend with my grandma. On Christmas Eve I arrived to my grandma's place and she greeted me like she always does, with a tight hug and lots of kisses. I barely even stepped inside when she started offering me food. She had already made what could only be described as an all-you-can-eat buffet. We dug in and once we were done, she showed me where I could sleep for the night. It was a cozy little bedroom, which apparently used to be my mom's room when she was little. Grandma told me not to leave my room during Christmas night in order to avoid disrupting Santa in his work. She said that if I really needed to use the bathroom I could, but to be extremely quiet and not to go downstairs. On the nightstand she left a list of the things I should do before I go to bed to ensure I get a good present. I decided to play along and abide by the rules. I told her I'd read it before bed and do everything necessary and she seemed content with that. She wished me good night and left the room. I was pretty tired from the trip there and the enormous dinner I've eaten, so I lay down on the bed and involuntarily fell asleep within minutes. I awoke a few hours later. I glanced at my watch and realized it was 3:01 a.m. I got up to grab a glass of water downstairs from the kitchen and groggily walked through the dark, trying to avoid any loud noise or turning on the lights, not to wake Grandma. I went downstairs and turned on the kitchen light, gulping down a glass of water. I glanced towards the living room at the Christmas tree and something caught my attention under the glow of the decoration lights. There was a small plate, with a tiny paper that said "For Santa." I reckoned it was cookies and milk, but when I got closer I realized that the plate was empty. Red liquid was in it and right next to the plate was a small bucket. Obviously, I found this weird, but figured that Grandma may have just forgotten to put it away or something. I turned off the kitchen lights and returned to my room, just then remembering the list my grandma gave me. I grabbed it off my nightstand and started reading. Dear James, thank you for visiting me for Christmas. You made your grandma really happy. Now Christmas is a little different in this house than what you're probably used to, so it's very important that you follow these rules on the list. 1. Make sure to close your windows and ensure they are closed properly. These old windows don't work properly sometimes, so if you feel like cold air is coming in, let me know. 2. Don't put any wood in the fireplace after 9 p.m. Santa will be really angry if it's scalding in the chimney or if there's still smoke. 3. You didn't forget about milk and cookies, did you? I stopped reading and chuckled at the list. Grandma clearly wanted me to follow the basic rules for Santa like when I was a kid, but again I decided to oblige. I continued reading the list. In this household we don't use milk and cookies, we use raw meat and blood. I already left a bucket by the Christmas tree and there's a raw piece of chicken I put on the plate. Santa sure loves his diet. 4. If you are woken up by the sound of scratching or knocking on your window, ignore it. Your room is on the 2nd floor, there is no way to reach up to it. In fact, it's best not to look there, but if you see someone beckoning you, pretend they're not there. They may try to open the window from the outside. This is why it's so important to keep the windows closed. 5. You may hear growling coming from the kitchen. It's okay, because Santa never comes upstairs and since I already left the chicken for him, that should satisfy him. By this point I was sure Grandma was just messing with me. That was until I heard the sound of 3 gentle knocks on the window behind me. I froze in place, staring at the list, but practically staring through it. 3 more gentle knocks ensued, but I did my best not to give away that I heard them. Once again, there were 3 more knocks and then the sound of scratching started. First gently and then louder, as if a rat was trying to bite through the wall. It lasted for around a minute until it completely stopped. Only when it did I gather enough courage to slightly shift my position. That was a mistake though, because when I looked down to the floor, at the light which was cast in from the window, I saw the unmistakable shadow in the form of a humanoid silhouette stretched across. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked like whoever was there held both his hands on the window and stared directly towards me. I decided that the best thing to do is continue reading the list to try and distract myself. 6. If someone walks into your room while you're sleeping and you happen to wake up, pretend that you're still asleep. In the worst case scenario, the person will sit on the edge of your bed and observe you, so do your best not to let them know you're awake. If you feel their breath on your neck and it gets progressively closer, it means they realized you're awake. 7. You may hear me calling you from downstairs. Don't listen to it. I will under no circumstances go downstairs during the night. 8. Last and most important rule, if you get up to go to the bathroom, never ever turn on any lights in the house. He has trouble noticing you in the dark, but if you turn on the lights, he will be able to follow you wherever you go, and then not even locking your door will help. 9. Follow these simple rules and in the morning, we can open your Christmas presents. Love. Grandma. The scratching and knocking had already stopped by the time I was done reading and the shadow from the window was gone. I got into bed and covered myself over my head, shivering, and not from the cold. Sometime during the night I heard my door open, but did my best to ignore the footsteps and low growling noise. I either passed out or fell asleep sometime later, but all I know is I woke up to the sound coming downstairs from the kitchen. I shot up, looking around the room and at the window, rubbing my temples and thinking about the nightmare I had. I left my room and immediately heard my grandma's voice calling me from downstairs, to come open the presents. I told her I'm coming, when I suddenly felt a grip on my wrist. I turned around and saw my grandma there, staring at me, wide-eyed. She leaned in and whispered in my ear, with a trembling voice. You turn to get to places more conveniently without having to wait for buses. If you ask me what car I drive, I can't tell you more than what color it is. I had just left from my parents' home and I had a 2-hour-long car drive ahead of me. It was dark already and the highway was surprisingly crowded at the pay toll, so I checked my GPS for another route. It led me to an old road that I never took before and it looked like I could cut 20 minutes, so I decided to take it. The road itself seemed well maintained, but the problem was there were no lights anywhere. Even with my high beams I could barely see through the devouring darkness ahead of me. I slowed down, unsure if there were any upcoming curves or animals that could jump in front of my car. About 10 minutes into my drive, I saw a person on the side of the road. He was holding his thumb out, trying to hitch a ride. I didn't really want to let strangers inside my car, especially in an isolated place like this one, so I ignored him and moved on. I wondered what the guy was doing in the middle of nowhere hitchhiking, but I shrugged it off and continued. 10 minutes after that, I saw another person on the side of the road with his thumb out. As I passed by, I realized it was the same person. His face and clothes were dirty, but it was undoubtedly the same person. Had I somehow gone back? I had been driving forward this whole time and there were no turns or curves anywhere. I checked my GPS and I seemed to be on the right track, 74 kilometers remaining. Suspicious, but convinced there was a logical explanation, I continued. 10 minutes later, there he was again. Same person, and yet different. His forehead was bloody and his clothes ripped in places. I looked at him holding his thumb out and sped my car up. At this point I started to panic a little. I turned on my GPS again and it showed I still had 90 kilometers ahead until the next turn. What the hell? Another person on the road. The same person again, bloodier than last time, arm which he held out visibly fractured, with a bone sticking out. I looked away from him and continued driving. I looked at the GPS and it showed that I had 105 kilometers in front of me. What's going on here, damn it? I inhaled and exhaled deeply, telling myself there should be a gas station or some fucking thing nearby. The road can't stretch on forever, right? 10 minutes had passed since running into the person on the road and there he was again. He was bloody all over and his clothes were ripped in various places. He had a huge scar on his forehead and blood was running down his face. I ignored him once more, feeling his gaze on the back of my head as I passed by. I looked at the GPS. 187 kilometers until I reached my destination. Fuck. I turned on the radio to have something keep me company from this deafening silence and I found a talk show. It put my mind at ease a little bit, made me feel like I was not completely alone. The person on the radio talked about the news and I tried to listen to him, focusing on the road and hoping against hope I would not run into that guy again. Now if we move on to the sports news, our boys scored an amazing. The voice stopped for a brief moment, which made me think the radio cut out, but then it continued. Don't look behind. I stared at the road, but squinted my eyes, trying to figure if I had just imagined that. Do not look behind. Whatever you do, don't look behind. My blood froze and I suddenly got a very strong urge to look in the rearview mirror. I resisted for a few seconds and then fell into the trap and looked. The person who was hitchhiking was on my back seat, bloodier than ever, staring at me. I screamed and swerved off the road, falling into a ditch that stopped my car completely, forcing me to slam my head on the steering wheel. It took me a moment to regain my senses, and when I did, I jerked my head towards the back seat. It was empty. I dragged myself out of my car, assessing the damage. There was no way I could get it out of the ditch. I looked around, having a sudden feeling of unease, and then pulled out my cell phone to call for help. But no matter what number I called, the line was dead, so I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to the road on foot and started walking. A few minutes into my hike and I saw headlights coming from behind me. I put my thumb out to hitch a ride, but the car just drove past me. I continued walking and some time later, another set of headlights appeared in the distance. I raised my thumb again, but the car didn't slow down. As it drove past me, a shocking realization hit me like a ton of bricks. It was the same car from before. It's been an hour and the same car keeps passing by. Usually the elevator is slow, making a few stops along the way, but what bothers me more is the fact that the elevator always seems to evade me by going all the way up, down, opposite of where I am just before I press the call button. Yesterday, I was in the elevator with around 5 people, who had to get out on the way down. The last person got out on the 5th floor, leaving me alone in the elevator. However, instead of continuing to go down, the elevator suddenly started going up. Great, I thought, I must have forgotten to press the ground floor button and now I have to go up again. The elevator stopped shortly after, but I was greeted with an unfamiliar sight, a vast, empty space of rooms, with dilapidated white walls, old neon lights and a concrete floor with cracks in places. I thought this must have been some unused office floor which was under renovation or construction. As I stepped forward to check where I was, the elevator closed behind me and I was left alone on the floor. There was no way I would wait for it to come back again. I decided to find the staircase and make my way down. The rooms seemed to be expanding in various directions, so I took the one on the left, since it felt more natural to me. I passed through one room, then 2, then 3. And then it hit me, something which made my dread rise like boiling water. The rooms continued expanding in all directions. Since I was going left and the elevator was very close to the front of the building, I should have run into a wall by now. But there were none. Not even windows. Panicking, I made a dash back to where I came from, but it was impossible to find my way around this maze. Hello? I shouted with a cracked voice, is anybody here? All that followed was the buzzing of the neon lights. But then I heard something else. I steadied my breathing and heard what sounded like footsteps upon the concrete floor, echoing somewhere close to me. Hello? Who's there? Please, I need help. The footsteps sounded like they were getting closer, but due to the echo it was impossible to tell where they were coming from. A flood of relief washed over me as I realized I wasn't alone here. Hey, I'm right in here, buddy. I shouted, thank God, I thought I was gonna be lost here forever. My phone suddenly vibrated. I pulled it out, scolding myself for not using it earlier. There was a text message from an unknown number. It said, "Stay away from them." The footsteps that were slow and deliberate earlier now turned into a frantic sprint. I didn't wait to see who or what was there, but the sudden feeling of being caught by something predatory made me run faster than I ever thought imaginable. I didn't care where I was running, I just ran through room after room, praying to every god that exists to grant me freedom or a quick death, while those footsteps kept following me the whole time, never closer and never more distant. My chest and legs were burning, but the fear and adrenaline prevented me from stopping. And then, as if on cue, I suddenly saw an elevator in front of me. It opened as I was running toward it, and in that panicked moment something in the back of my mind told me that this one could lead to an even worse place, but I didn't care. I could hear the thing behind me closing in and I ran into the elevator so quickly that I practically rammed the wall of it and collapsed to the floor. Just as the doors of the elevator started closing,